Good afternoon. It's my great honor and privilege to welcome you to the 2023 Kislak Lecture to be delivered today by Dr. Stephanie Wood of the University of Oregon on the visual lexicon of Aztec hieroglyphs. The J.I. Kislak Chair for the Study of the History and Culture of the Early Americas was created here as a part of the very generous work of the Kislak Family Foundation, which supported both the creation of this chair and, of course, the donation of the J.I. Kislak collection, which came to the library in 2014. As the fifth occupant of the Kislak Chair, it is a remarkable privilege for us to learn about this exciting work being done by Dr. Stephanie Wood. Please join me in welcoming her.
Thank you so much. And I'd like to just begin with a little thank you to everyone who came today, and those of you who are Zooming in from afar. Thank you for your interest. It means the world to me. I also want to thank the Kluge Center, the Library of Congress, the Kislak Foundation, the many years of support of Jay Kislak and Arthur Dunkelman in my research area. And finally, and not least, to thank the collaborators, contributors, assistants, and interns who have helped make this project possible. So, this presentation, I'll start with a little slide. A map's always a good orientation point. And this is just to show you what we call the Aztec Empire. Even though Aztec is a term that is going out of fashion somewhat, the people who created and occupied this empire didn't call themselves Aztecs. They speak and spoke the Nahuatl language, the peoples of this central highland Mexican region, and today we often call them Nahuas. So you'll probably hear me speak about the Nahuas and also the language Nahuatl, which is the language these central Mexican peoples spoke, and maybe 1.5 million still do. So this is the project I'm going to share with you today. I've been working on, well, I've been here for 9 months, and I actually started it some years back, but it really got a huge boost these 9 months occupying a chair at the Kluge Center. There are over 3,000 hieroglyphs annotated in a very detailed way now in this collection, and it's growing daily. So it's available already for use, but I would recommend you keep checking back because more content is flowing in. And we have probably 500 users a month, which is not what I hope it will be. It's not bad for a start, but I hope it will continue to grow as more people find it useful. There is a competitor online. This is an online searchable database of Aztec or Nahuatl hieroglyphs coming out of Mexico and organized to a large degree by a colleague in Paris, Mark Touvenot. And it's a wonderful resource if you read Spanish. There's also quite a bit of French in this database, so it's useful. I use it all the time, but it's not quite the same as mine. And one of the things that makes it different is that we do a really intensive study of every glyph and annotate it heavily in ways that are not annotated in this project. So, my project, the Visual Lexicon, who are our target audiences? First of all, probably first and foremost, native speakers of Nahuatl. Because this is an endangered language, I've been wanting most of my career to create resources that help shore up the literacy and deepen the understanding of the language and the resources that include this language. So native speakers today who want to know more about their heritage materials, I hope, will use this resource and some of the others I've created. I want to give a special shout out to native speaker Ofelia Cruz Morales, who has helped me on the visual lexicon, and also the whole team that she was a part of in Zacatecas, Mexico, who helped create another resource, the online Nahuatl Dictionary, which is another project some of you might know about. The project also targets scholars and teachers and students of many different subjects. I believe it has interdisciplinary uses, including history, art, math, science, culture, religion, writing systems, and more. And finally, we're targeting epigraphers, people who translate and analyze hieroglyphs, who are continually finding new pictorial manuscripts which contain hieroglyphs and needing to translate and study those. Sometimes they're glossed. They have a little label, alphabetic label, telling what they are or what they mean, and that's a great start. But to get really even deeper than that, I hope they will find this resource useful. And what are we tracking in terms of this detailed annotation of the glyphs? We are asking where are these glyphs from, when were they painted, if we could ever know who painted or drew them, what types of glyphs are these, each one. Is it a simplex? Is it a compound? How many parts if it's a compound? And what's the reading order? Because the reading order varies. And so we'll be quantifying the different patterns to see what was most common, what was second most common, and so on. What parts of speech do the glyphs include? What words do they represent? And what's the deeper meaning of each of those words? Not just that we don't want just a one-word translation or one-word definition, which is even pretty impossible, I would think. Even if you look at an English language dictionary, you don't find one word explaining what the other word means. So what do they mean more deeply? And then what is the nature of the glyph? Size, shape, color, style, and so on. Does it look early? Does it look late? You know, all those questions. We compare the glyphs to what I call realia, which would be photographs of carved stone and painted ceramics, which we know are pre-contact objects. So we can see, are the glyphs, say, painted in 1550, anything like the ones before 1519, which was the date of the invasion of the Hernando Cortez expedition. Finally, what cultural, social, political, economic themes are highlighted by these glyphs, so that if somebody comes in wanting to know more about religion, or they want to know about the socio-political entity called the Altepet, or what have you, that they can find pathways into the material without knowing anything. So we're tracking all of that and more, but incidentally, there are 102 themes at this point, and as we discover that there are glyphs that enlighten us about another theme, we add that, so that the list of themes has grown organically as we go through the material. So I mentioned this online Nahuatl dictionary, which is another project I created beginning in the year 2000, so it's 23 years old now. This project is online, accessible. It's an index basically of manuscript usage of terms. So we find examples of a word in a given phrase or sentence, and we take that and put it into the dictionary under the, say, whatever word we're looking for, targeting, and then we add the translation, be it in English or Spanish or French or German, what have you, so that people who are trying to understand a word will have lots of examples of early Nahuatl usage, and then it also has contemporary Nahuatl, the Eastern Huastecan Nahuatl language, the variant from Eastern Huasteca, and that was contributed by the Zacatecas team I mentioned earlier. So this repository is my go-to resource when I find a glyph. And if that glyph has a gloss, I look up the word, first of all, in the dictionary and see what ideas I can get about the glyph through that means. Eventually, this dictionary will point to the lexicon, and the visual lexicon will point back to the dictionary so that they're mutually supportive. So this dictionary online has 150,000 users a year, so we're very excited about that. And some of you probably have used it. I think if you're here, it might be because you know something about the Nahuatl language. But the shifting project into the visual lexicon involves dissecting and extracting attestations of glyphs from these pictorial manuscripts, such as you see on the screen. There's some of them around the room here too that have Nahuatl hieroglyphs on them. So as you can see, some of them have little, like the one on the left here, the image here, has little alphabetic glosses. As I mentioned, a little word that's a clue to what the glyph says, and the one on the right doesn't have those. There are contextualizing documents, though, for the manuscript on the right, which is from Huexotzinco. The one on the right is held here in the Library of Congress. So one of the treasures, many treasures held here. So when we extract, I use the word glyph or hieroglyph. Some people say, is that really a hieroglyph or is that a pictograph? And some really reputable sources still say the Nahuatls had pictography and pictograms. They ignore the fact that a lot of it is phonetic. So I thought today I would emphasize a little bit for you the phoneticism in this writing system. Just to say, well, what are pictographs? These are some ancient ones painted on rock. The ones on the left are pictographs. The ones on the right are petroglyphs because they're carved in the stone. And I see these as sort of the precursors of hieroglyphic writing in Mesoamerica. So, of course, much older and probably read aloud. Perhaps stories were told to these, as people viewed these objects that were carved and painted. But for the most part, we don't think they were phonetic, and they weren't syllabic, and so on. So there's a difference between pictography and hieroglyphic systems. So just to emphasize, the Nahuatl writing system was at least partly phonetic and therefore language specific, because the sounds that the signs suggest are part of the language that you would have to know Nahuatl to understand them. Even though part of this pictorial writing system could be understood by people of other languages to some extent. So it's not to say we don't have, what some people might want to call pictographs. It's just to say that there's more than that. So here are some simple logograms, simplex logograms. They're not compounded. They're just by themselves. And they have, they represent one word or two words. So digging stick or corn cob or cultivated parcel. These could probably be recognized by a lot of Mesoamerican people, even not just Nahuatls. Now, Nahuatls would have a certain word that would come to mind for these items. So, like ashoken for the digging stick that has a zoomorphic figure on the handle. The corn cobs would be elotl, and that's where we get the elote word in Spanish today in Mexico, or xiloc, and jilote is another Nahuatlism taken into Spanish in Mexico. The cultivated parcels are tlali, which means land, or quemit, which also means cultivated parcel. Whoops, went the wrong way. Now, from that sort of a simplex logogram, you can combine them into sentences. So here's a sentence that Gordon Whitaker explains in his recent, the best book on Nahuatl hieroglyphs by Gordon Whitaker. And this is a sentence that's read from bottom to top. And it says, in Tenochtitlan, and the bottom glyph is actually a compound there with a stone and a cactus. That's Tenoch for Tenochtitlan. A fire was drilled, and you see a horizontal piece of wood with an arrow sticking into it and smoke curls coming out. And some of you maybe in Girl Scouts or Boy Scouts learned how to drill fire by spinning a stick against another stick until it smoked. This comes from this culture, and this was used in ceremonial times like inaugurations. And this is the Great Temple. Here, you can visit this temple, the ruins of it today in Mexico City, right at the Zócalo. There's still quite a bit of it standing, and it's a wonderful place to go. And then the date that this happened, the inauguration of the Great Temple, took place in 8 reeds. So that upper left corner there has the date, the reed symbol, and 8 ones, and that was 1487. So this is a historical account of an important date in Mexican history. Here's the book I was mentioning that I highly recommend. This is where Gordon Whitaker, I think, makes a really strong case for this being a hieroglyphic writing system with iconic signs that are both phonograms and logograms. So phonograms, of course, have this phonetic aspect to them that I will be explaining in some examples here. So here's a compound place name for a town named Xocoyoltepec. Now, it has various items that could have a phonetic dimension or at least represent a word, logogram or phonogram. So I just would like you to take a minute and look at that and see, like, what would you pick out in terms of what do you see, even if you don't know the words in Nahuatl. Anybody have something they'd like to volunteer to identify in this image?
Jaguar scan foot.
Very good.
Some kind of plant.
Yes. Very good. Well, you know a little bit about Mesoamerica, so that's not really fair, but yes. So I wear my jaguar sweater today, my ocelot sweater. That's jaguar skin above the foot there, and hanging down from the skin are two bells. And up above this little bit of a leg is a plant, and behind it all is a hill or mountain. So the parts that are the logograms, I mean, the really essence of the town is Xocoyoli, which is the plant's name, and Tepec means on the hill. So on the hill of the sorrel plant is basically the name of the town. So the foot, Xo, and the bells, Coyoli, are there as a phonetic complement to tell you this is what this plant is. If you don't recognize it, it's a Xocoyoli plant, because you've got the Xo and the Coyoli there to tell you that. So that's a phonetic complement, two phonetic complements. So here's where I break it down for you into the various elements. We call them elements. And for instance, the foot and the bells, we also would put in the database as their own separate entries, even though they're elements of a compound. We say as such. And if we find the bells on their own, which we do, then you can compare these bells against other bells and so on. I just want to add a little bit about the Tepec heel, this dark green bell-shaped thing behind the foot. It breaks down into, it starts with te, and the te comes from those curly stones, tet, around the top and the slopes of the hill. And at the bottom, there are these red and yellow horizontal lines, and that's where, if there were a natural spring, it would come from there. And so most people in the early days of settlement wanted to be in a defensive site on a hill, and a hill that would have a natural spring. So this is where we eventually get the term town, al tepet, al from water, and tepet from hill or mountain. So I just wanted to share that with you, that in a way that's a little bit phonetic as well. Okay, more phonetic indicators in compounds. Just a few more examples. I love all of these. So I'm sharing the pond, the term for pond, this round, blue, swirling water, is a pond as opposed to a lake or a river or what have you. And the reason we know that, the word for pond is atescat, and this pond has a mirror in the middle, and the word for mirror is tescat. So it's saying, this is not just any body of water, this is an atescat. And that's the clue, is that little black mirror with the red ring around it. Mirrors were often made of polished obsidian and would create quite a reflection. Of course, it has a semantic role too, the mirror does, because a lot of ponds, if they're still, can be mirror ponds, right? So that's kind of a nice coincidence. Here's another phonetic indicator telling us the name of this town. Maybe some of you have been to Coyoacan, which is today just southern part of Mexico City. A really fun place to visit. And this town gets its name from an animal that we would call a coyote or a coyote, depending on what state you're from. Out in the West, a lot of people say coyote, that's a coyote. Well, that's closer to the coyote, which was the Aztec word, the Nahuatl word, coyote. And then it has a hole in the side, which is coyoctli. So that's the semantic indicator that says this is not just any dog, or this is not a mountain lion or whatever. This is a coyote, because we've got the coyoctli there to clue you in, tip you off the phonetic sound for the logogram. And finally, Ahuehuepan. This is another town name, and it's the focus is a tree, and the tree is called the Ahuehuet, which is a type of cypress. It's a big tree. It's an impressive tree. And to tell you what kind of tree, it's not just a kwahuit. It's not just a torch pine. It's not a mesquite. If you use mesquite charcoal, that's from a word for a tree in Mexico. Anyway, this is an ahuehuetl tree, and we know it because of the drum, the huehuet, standing drum. But this drum is extra wide and big and made of wood, so it has sort of a semantic value as well as a phonetic one to tell you that this is one of those trees that has a great big wide trunk. And here's one from Oaxaca. First time I laid eyes on this tree, I almost cried. Some tears really did come. It was just the most incredible, impressive tree I have ever seen. And there are a lot of those in Mexico. So now we have entirely phonetic compounds, not just, say, a logogram supported by a phonetic indicator, but actually all the parts of these compound glyphs are phonetic. So you could get really fooled if you thought that what you see is what it means or what it's about. It's not. It's, for instance, the middle one. It's not about a ceramic pot with water coming out the top. Those are the ko is for komit, which means jug, and for at, which means water. But when you put all that together and you say koat, that's actually a serpent. That's a word for serpent or snake. So these are some examples of entirely phonetic compounds that you just can't you can't call these pictographs. You can't just know what they mean by looking. If you don't know Nahuatl, you're not going to be able to pronounce it. You're not going to know what it says or what it means, anything. You would totally get confused. I mean, the one on the left, eating maize, is sort of what it looks like. But senquali is someone who's entirely good. So that's so different from eating maize. Just to say that person is entirely good. You're not saying that person likes to eat corn. I mean, so you just have to know. In some cases, it takes time to figure these out. These are puzzles. So there are locative suffixes on a lot of place names, and this ko is an example. Ko from komit again for the ceramic jug or pot. And so you can see it appearing in all of these examples, and it's all to say in or at, the place of. So that's a phonetic syllable, if you will, in a longer word. And this phonetic syllable ko doesn't have to come at the end and be a locative meaning in or at. It can have all different kinds of readings. It's a phonetic, can come in the middle or the end of a word, but it isn't necessarily saying in or at. So ko is a one that was very liberally applied and used just simply to get you to say that syllable ko. That's an interesting one. There's another phonetic syllable, tsin, which is buttocks or bottom or rear end, or whatever word you like to use. There are other words we won't go into. But this syllable means revered or little. And in this case, the top center, teokaltsin, is referring to a temple, and that would be a revered place. So at the revered temple would be the meaning of this bottom. This rear end, in this case, is revered. And on the right, Tolancinco, you have some tule plants. That's where we get our word tules, reeds. I hope you know that word in English anyway. Tolancinco is little Tolan, the little spin-off town of Tula, what we call Tula today in Mexico. Some people who lived there moved off and settled their own town called Little Tula, basically. So there are lots of examples of those, and you can't think that it has anything to do with the rear end. In none of those cases. Now, similarly, we have tlan from the word tlantli, meaning tooth or teeth. But in all the cases where it's used here and many, many, many more, it has nothing to do with teeth. It's just to get you to say tlan, that phonetic syllable, which is by, near, or among in place names. So, where, the place where they have a lot of walls, or the place where it rains a lot, or the place where there's a lot of sand, that kind of thing is what tlan is. And the teeth have nothing to do with it except to evoke that sound tlan. And titlan is very much like tlan, except it only fits on the end of words that have a certain ending to the root. So it's a linguistic explanation, if you will. But the titlan is shown when there's a full mouth of teeth, not just the two front teeth, but the full mouth of teeth. So that's indicating there's a ligature there. You're not just going to say tlan, you're going to say titlan at the end of this place name. So Actually, this was a discovery by Gordon Whitaker that we are tracking, quantifying, and he's almost always right. So I'm tickled that we have found some that don't fit, but there definitely is a pattern there. So we're working on that. Now, here are some phonetic syllables that I don't know anyone who has identified these, but we've found that there's on and om ligatures in numbers. Numbers are like little math equations. So you get 5 plus 5 plus 3 makes 13. And sometimes 5 and 5 just get automatically added and called 10. So 10 plus 3 is 13. But at any rate, visually, we have these connectors, om and om, which are found in the alphabetic writing of the numbers. So this is a new discovery, and we're tracking it. Now, not, again, just like I was saying a minute ago, this is not 100%. You don't find all numbers written with these gaps. So, but when you do, there's a significance to it. There's an alphabetic explanation as you read the numbers. So another phonetic syllable is nen, which is a reference to negative behavioral traits. It tends to be a prefix instead of a suffix. And a lot of people thought for a long time it was the indefinite reflexive pronoun, ne, but it's not ne, it's almost always nen, which is something else. Nen is this real negative. But when you go to the dictionary and you look up the word nenet, which nen comes from, there are 3 definitions, and this is from the 1571 dictionary of a Franciscan friar. He says it either means idol, or it means doll, or it means women's genitals. Okay, those are 3 different things, quite different. So we're going through all the uses of nen in various combinations and looking to see, well, you know, is he right? Does it really mean women's genitals, or does it mean doll, or does it mean, say, the image of an idol? So several times I think, like the 3 on the left here, I think are idols, and the one on the right I think might be a doll. Probably a female doll because she has a skirt on. Now, the reason I think those other 3 were idols is that they have these strange blocky protrusions on their heads that really look a lot like this supernatural eagle owl. So this is a working hypothesis, still in process. Another phonetic syllable is wa. The Nahuatl language is full of was in many, many, many words. So we actually had already identified by 2 different scholars the wa syllable as either a leaf from Iswat or the grasping hand from just possession. Wa means possession. And then wawana, to make stripes. So we see these 3 different representations of the phonetic syllable in lots of different glyphs. And I'm very excited to say that I can add 3 more examples of the wa phonetic syllable. One from Nahuatl speech. In the upper left corner, you see little swirls coming out of the flower, little scrolls. Those are very much like speech scrolls. And then on the middle image, you've got a plant on the, flowers on the left and a plant on the 2 right sprigs. And that's wildly, that's how they draw amaranth. And then the bottom one, the gourd bowl, wa kali. So these are, again, we're quantifying and tracking these, and also just watching to see if we find more wa syllables. But here's the wa syllable for siwat, which means woman, put on a man's cheek. And we see from the gloss, the little alphabetic writing below, that he's Agustin Siwaman, which means womanlike. So this is a man whose name is womanlike. And they've really abbreviated the wa here for siwat and just used the wa on his cheek. But it works because of the gloss. Thank heavens we had the gloss, because otherwise I'd be thrown by that. Sorry, back this way. Now, just as an aside, the naming of men with the word siwat, woman, is not at all unusual. There are so many men who have the word woman in their names. So here are some examples. Woman, mother of the people, woman pride, woman heart, prone woman, not sure what's going on there, maiden, unmarried woman, and woman's genitals. So there's that nen, this is chachu nene, there's that nen for genitals coming up. So we were wondering if we were ever going to see it, and there it seems to be. There's a chalchiwit, this precious jade stone next to her hip, which Gordon Whitaker has said to me jade is sometimes used to say women's genitals as well. So we'll see, we'll keep following that. Back to phonetic complements, here are some stripes on trees. So black stripes were called plilquawit, which sounds a lot like quawit, which is the word for tree. So these were added to say, this is not an oak tree, this is not a pine tree, this is not a mesquite tree, but just a tree, quawit. So they have the black stripes. So I actually discovered this myself, and then I'm reading von Mentz, and I go, oh, she saw it too. So darn, I was thinking that was my discovery. Shoot. And here's one that I've come up with. As far as I know, I'm the only one. Excuse me. And this is not actual phonetic syllable, but it's iconography that verges on writing. It's like what I call the hash marks, these little two simple lines. Their most early glyphs show them on corn cobs, and they look like cute little faces to me. And we do have lots of corn cobs with human faces on them. So I was wondering if that's what it was. And then I started noticing that the tortilla has these marks, and the digging stick for cultivating corn has these marks. So I'm hoping this is, again, a hypothesis that we're tracking, and I hope we'll be right. So two hallmarks of alphabetic Nahuatl that is rendered visually. One is what we call visual reduplication, what I'm calling visual. It's something that appears in alphabetic Nahuatl, which is the repetition of a syllable. So Tetenanco or Totoltepec or Xochipepena or Tecuacua. So a syllable repeats in the words, and we've known that always, that in the alphabetic writing, these certain syllables will repeat, and it has there's a reason to it. Often it's numerical, like there are multiples of this, or it's a repeated action. So I started looking in the visuals for reduplication, as we call it, and found quite a few. There are more than this, but those are some. And then another kind of variant on the reduplication of syllables is to show movement as repeated action, which is, again, like te tsotsonki is a stone worker who has to take one stone and pound another repeatedly. And so there are these little squiggly lines to suggest that, I'm saying. That's my interpretation. The same with the middle one. It's a stone worker. The big stone that's being pounded has lots of vibration to it. And kui to gather multiple things. And we show the hand with various things and little marks suggesting motion, repeated action. Another kind of dualism in Nahuatl alphabetic writing is what we call diphrasism, two phrases. And these are metaphorical couplets. They're often very poetic. So, for example, we have the arrows, the shield, which mean war. We have the book, the mirror, which is a portal to the sacred world. And I love that. Books here in the library, some of you might especially appreciate that. Books are a portal to another world, at least. Let's say that. Then looking for other examples, I came across this woven seat, which is the couplet for governance. Because this was a throne that the Tlatoque, the leaders, sat on, and the mat would be, people would approach them, or maybe they could stretch their legs out because they were usually sitting down. Flood and conflagration, or scorched earth. This is a metaphor for the apocalypse, disaster. It's usually red fire interwoven with blue water. This one is just, they didn't have blue apparently when they painted that one. So, there we go. Another diphrasism example is to write or to paint, or painting and writing. And I think that's what's happening here in this stone I discovered has this parallel glyphs going all the way around it, the same two repeating. So, and then you have in this manuscript those exact symbols paired, and the woman painting them is called the painter. So I'm pretty sure, you know, this is a painting she has painted, and sometimes it would be writing. The same words were used for painting and writing for the Nahuatls, which is kind of cool in a way. They don't separate them quite the same way we do. But I'm going to try to unpack this a little bit. So on the left, we have what I think are two speech scrolls back to back. And on the right, something that looks like a flower. And so looking for other glyphs to help us understand these carved in stone, we know in pre-contact times. So on the left, we have a manuscript from 1541, on the right from 1560. So these are more, recent after the invasion and colonization of Mexico by the Spanish. There's still writing for some time, for many decades really, in hieroglyphs, and so comparing these. So here's some speech scrolls on the right, which give us an idea of what we're seeing on the left, which may be a two-way conversation, one scroll going one way and one going the other. And it was apparently written down, if we're talking about painting and writing. And then there are little dots hidden in among the speech scrolls, 4 little dots. And those little dots were called tonali, which referred to the sun and to a day. Of course, the sun visits us for a day, and vibrance in general. And sort of, there was a tonali that a person could have, which was a personal animating energy that was located in the head. And it's solar related as well. So anyway, here's some examples of this sun's vibrance on various precious things like signs for the day, sun, our mirror again, only here with the vibration around the edge, and jade and turquoise and so on. There are many examples. So going back to these speech scrolls that were written down, what kind of written record is this? Well, there's some discussion about it. I went to a wonderful presentation by Haley Woodward at Dumbarton Oaks a couple of months ago, and she was showing this glyph on the left, and she described it as the Tonal Amat, which is the divinatory almanac. And someone else in the audience said, well, that's really any kind of writing, not just the almanac. And I looked up, well, what does Mark Touvenot say? And he says it either means Ilwia to speak or Ilwit day. So we've got different interpretations, and in some ways I think everyone's right. So, but we're still tracking it. Here on the right, the image on the right is a date, 6 house, and it's surrounded by a red box. So our 2 speech scrolls are surrounded by a red box, which does argue maybe that this is a date. So it could be a day in the almanac, it could represent that, as well as other kinds of writing. I think that might be right. We'll watch. And then the other part of the carved stone, the other one that looks like a flower, as I mentioned, we find that in glyphs saying that it's quilol or quiloli, painting or writing. This is a man's name on the right here. Also a very famous poet from Texcoco, Nezahualcóyotl. He said that things are written or painted with flowers, since you can't translate it just written or painted unless you know more. But anyway, because they had the same word for that. Continuing with this example, though, we find the Texauqui. This is a man who was a face painter, and he has on his cheek this very same symbol, I think. It's a little more stylized, if you will, but I think it might be the same thing. So there's painting again, or writing, but painting and writing for sure, one of those. And another example here in the lower left, painting and writing quilo. Interesting how it can vary in how it looks, but that's not unusual with glyphs. You have different artists making them in different towns at different times, and so you get variety. But Touvenot again suggests that we track this root quil, and we'll come to understand better what we're seeing in the glyphs. And so I'm following his lead there and trying to track every word, every glyph I come upon that seems to have quil in it to see whether it means writing or painting or something else, but ideally one of those or both of them. So here's some more examples I've come across, and these look to me like they have European influence, because writing and painting now is not with glyphs, but little black marks on a page, and the one on the left really looks like a book. So the European friars, of course, introduced the book and were educating people in how to read and write with the alphabet, so the Roman alphabet. So there we get that influence showing up here. We also find the quill component in writing and painting in the soil, and I think that's a kind of exciting thing to think about, that when you're an agriculturalist, which most Nahuatls were, they're cultivating the land. If maybe they're making marks like digging furrows in the land, apparently the term wawana meant to both draw lines on the earth and to draw on paper. So, in a way, they're scratching into the earth, they're drawing in the earth, and then planting their seeds. And maybe when those seeds grow up and flower, even maize flowers, you get the sort of painting version, the color coming in there. That's something we're finding lots of. Excuse me, talk with my hands. And then Quill is coming up with words relating to stone carving quite a bit. So here's a stone carver on the left. It looks like those same speech scrolls. So maybe he was writing in stone, which we know was a very prevalent pre-Columbian activity, pre-contact. The middle one, some kind of design maybe on stone. And then on the right, we have, again, European influence, where they were rebuilding Mexico City after it was destroyed through warfare, and they needed columns. Well, the Europeans wanted columns for their buildings. They were insisting the Nahuatls carve them. And so here we get stone carving coming in looking like columns. Finally, Touvenot recommended we watch for quill with regard to embroidery. And I can't say that I've found the use in Nahuatl of the root quill in relationship to embroidery, but I wouldn't be a bit surprised if we did, because look at the visual at least. That carved stone again that looks like a flower. Look at the woman's blouse had a plaque, a kind of a, what we call a pechero in Spanish, a piece of cloth right here where the V-neck comes together to kind of reinforce that, but also right over the woman's heart. A very important place, I think, to have this symbol sewn and embroidered on, and even in carved in stone in pre-contact times. There's one other example there on the right, top row. So we're watching for this. There are some words that have quill in it that are related to clothing, but usually it's men's clothing. So there's tlaquil tilma, which is a cloak with a design on it. So we're going along for a while with this just to see where it gets us. This is more than a flower, I think, though. I've been saying flower, but it's a quincunx. It's a shape that has, points to 4 directions, and it has a very important center. So it's got the 4 directions, east, west, north, south, and a center. And the center is often a vertical axis that connects the celestial realm with the underworld. So you've got pretty much everything covered, the universe. In the symbol for the sun here is another quincunx, and you have on the right hand an example of a tribute cloth that came out of Oaxaca with very elaborate designs that I think probably included either that symbol we've already seen for Quiloli or the sun, or there's an overlap. Now, to look a little further in ethnography across Mesoamerica, there is this study of a huipil, a blouse, in the Guatemala area of Atitlan, where a woman explaining to the ethnographer, Alan Christensen, that when a woman puts her head through the hole in the blouse, the neck hole, she's becoming the sun. Her head is the sun at zenith. So she becomes the axis. And the 4 cardinal directions are around her neck, pointing to, around the lake, volcanoes. You can see some volcanoes there. So I think, she's also locating herself at the Earth Lord's Cave, which is an entrance to the underworld. So underworld and the zenith of the sun at noon. And I found this also in Oaxaca. A tricky woman friend gave me one of her old huipiles. And this is, again, a woman in the marketplace trying to explain this garment to me. She said, when we put it on, our head is the sun at zenith, and the little marks around the neck there are the rays of the sun, and the streaming ribbons are rain coming down. And she said, and when we hold out our arms with this garment on, our arms are butterfly wings. And so it just really, really got to me, because here we have this glyph for Olin. Oftentimes looks like a butterfly with those little lines suggesting movement, like the wings are flapping. And I don't know if Jim Matthew is here today, but he writes about the pulsating rhythm of Olin as akin to butterfly wings. And so we see this again and again. And here's another Olin movement symbol linked to a ball cord. And the ball cord has this quincunx, the 4 cardinal directions, each one even painted a different color. And the center, where the rings are for the ball to go through, that this is linked to movement and is a cosmogram once again. So all of this repeats in different ways. Here we have the rubber ball, which bounces through the ball cord, which represents movement, of course, and also can be a symbol for the movement of the sun. And so we have some Olin glyphs look like Oli rubber, and some Oli glyphs look like Olin. So they're very much like complementing each other and have, of course, a relationship. So movement and a rubber ball. Bouncing rubber balls are native to Mesoamerica. So that's kind of exciting. And getting close to running out of time if I want to have time for questions. But just a few more slides. Here we are seeing how emotion is made visual. That's a kind of a fun thing that I've been intrigued with. So, you know, the guy in the upper left, he's no longer our friend. And the guy in the upper middle, he has no one with him. And the guy on the right, he makes a lot of mistakes. Lower left, a humble person. Lower middle, a widow. And she's got tears running down in that beautiful turquoise color. She's either a widow or abandoned woman, we're not sure, because that same term could be used for both. And then motolimia was poverty. So these are all reasons to be sad, right? Making sound visible is something else, which is kind of fun. And Steve Houston, who helped the Kislak Chair once, he was giving a series of lectures recently out of the National Gallery of Art, and he was talking about making sound visible, and I thought, oh, I thought I came up with that, but, you know, you can invent the wheel more than once, I guess. So anyway, I'm excited about some of these, like down the bottom of the ear with these little marks of sound by it, or the bell with little speech scrolls coming out of it. You know, it's obviously not speaking exactly, but making sound. And that oyowal is another bell with little dots for sound. Making odor and fragrance visual. My husband asked me to be sure and include this slide, so I have to give Bob credit here, and also want to say happy anniversary, Bob. Today's our anniversary. But anyway, so we have the gassy person, poor guy, and we have the fragrance, the good odor aroma coming out of the flowers there. And then finally, 3 more slides, tracking colonial influences. I mean, I could do a whole talk just on this topic, but of course, eventually all the temples, which were so ubiquitous, every little settlement had its own temple of different sizes and different quality, sure, but these eventually get replaced, the very same stones being used to build the little churches and chapels, and gradually the symbol for Teopan becomes this Christian church, as you see in the upper right. And then the word for divinity or divine forces was Teotl in Nahuatl, and the friars came in and said, okay, well, we're going to use Teotl to mean God. So, whereas it was once half a sun, the glyph for Teotl, it becomes these glyphs on the right, which are anthropomorphized. So, you know, it's kind of interesting that there's a little face there. And the ones on the bottom, at first I thought, are they wearing jester hats? But no, it's a stone. Stones had curling ends and diagonal stripes, so it's a stone sitting upright, and that's a phonetic indicator, te. Oops. So that's a phonetic complement for tail. And the final slide here, the eye was a human eye, but also it was equated with the stars in the night sky, like eyes were looking down on you at night. When you looked up, eyes were looking back. It's kind of a beautiful thing to think about. But also there was this figure called the Tlamau, a person who had special knowledge gained through experience, kind of a wise person is what that Tlamau meant. But over time, the Tlamau gets Europeanized, if you will, gets eyelashes and eyebrows, and pretty soon it's a pointed oval shape. Just so it's going through this visual transformation, just as it's going away from being something rather sacred to just being an eye. So there you have it. I just want to have a few quick things to say by way of conclusion. A beloved colleague said to me not too long ago, oh, those Nahuatl glyphs, those are boring. They're almost all place names and people's names, you know. Ho-hum. And I said, well, that's largely true. There are a lot of place names and people's names, as I've shown you today. But there are also dates. You've seen that. So, and I mean, somebody could probably say about our history, dare I say this, where there's Kluge scholars around, that our history is names and dates and places. You know, you can put it down that way, but once you start studying history, it's so rich and full and nuanced. That's the same way with glyphs. They're complicated puzzles. They're a challenge to decode. They show ingenuity and genius. They're grammatically diverse. You have nouns, verbs, prepositions, possessives, on, and they're always windows onto culture and history. And just one last little bit about the idea of creating an online searchable database. I believe it's really a great way to do this kind of research and also to share it as a reference work, because you can aggregate multiple attestations of glyphs and annotate them intensely to help with the search and retrieval, but also to help people understand them better and see patterns and variations. They don't all look alike. The digital format is great for expanding and editing, modifying things. When you find out, whoops, I was totally wrong on that one, you can fix it, which is great. So when you visit the site, be sure and put the date down that you saw it, because first thing you know, it'll be different. I hate to say that in a way that might discourage you from using it, but a couple last things. I would really love to find funding to keep this going, and also to create Nahuatl and Spanish language interfaces for the database. Right now, all the interface for going in and searching is in English. When you get inside, you'll find lots of Nahuatl and Spanish, but it would be nice to have those interfaces in different languages. And then finally, this collection is free and accessible currently. I just hope it isn't going to be ephemeral, because digital collections, digital reference resources can often disappear. Their platform goes out of date, or somebody says you can't have that on the server anymore, or what have you. And I want to take this chance to make a pitch for a national repository that will curate and ensure the longevity of digital reference works. And I figure, what better place to say this than in the Library of Congress, where they keep books for us so wonderfully. Maybe they can figure out a way to keep digital resources. Thank you very much. Shall I ask for questions? We have questions or comments are welcomed.
Hi, I'm actually curious about the reading order. So my understanding is that the typical Nahuatl glyph reading order is bottom to top. And I wonder if there's any sort of hypothesis as to why that differs from other Mesoamerican writing systems.
Yeah, that's a question I hope to be able to answer better after I have more glyphs. But right now, actually, downward is numerically more prominent than upward. And in fact, Gordon Whitaker also says downward is the way that was the most common. But we see side to side, we see up, down, and up again, and it's just wild. Of course, a lot of those variations are rare, but upward and downward are the two, and so I don't really know yet. I can't tell you for sure what the answer will be, but I love the question. I have these same questions, and I feel like once we have a really better handle on the Nahuatl system, we can start comparing it to others, and like Maya glyphs, and there's some really top-notch specialists in Maya glyphs out there. Yes.
The second question is going to come from the online audience. I'm going to read it to you right now. It is mentioned that the glyph lexicon is worked on via some community collaboration. How would people interested in contributing or volunteering help out, and what work can they do?
Oh, I love that, and I meant to go one slide forward, which says crowdsourcing is welcomed and encouraged, in fact, and I just want to say with full attribution, every bit of material I bring in from anyone has their name with it. So, if you want to analyze the full glyph, if you want to say, hey, I have a different interpretation of that glyph, that we have fields just for that, and each field has the credit attached to it. So I really heartily welcome you to encourage you to reach out to me, whoever it was who asked this question online. My email is swood, SWOOD, @uoregon.edu. So email me, share with me whatever material you think might fit in the database, and we'll go from there. It would be fantastic. I mean, for instance, well, there's so many codices. We've got 2 we're working on. One is the Codex Mendoza, which there's a page from it just outside the door there. And the other is the Matrícula de Huexotzinco, which is these 2 images are from. This manuscript has over 11,000 name glyphs alone, so we're plugging away at that one, but that's going to take us a while. So meanwhile, I've had a few people say, hey, I'm working on a codex, so I've got some glyphs for you. And I'll be like, great, send them on, you know, and we'll put them in. So, of course, you know, you have to know a little bit about what you're doing. Yeah, so. Other questions, comments? Yes.
Thank you for your lecture. And I'm just wondering if did you find any similarities or differences between this with the other cultures or languages like Chinese hieroglyphs?
I haven't. I really don't know the Chinese well enough to tell you. I haven't looked yet. But if you or if someone you know had that ability to compare, I would love to get some input. Where, say, someone would say, "Well, this glyph reminds me of or differs from," you know, and then add those kinds of comments. Because I think, and then with a link perhaps to send to the user to a resource online that has Chinese characters. So. That would be great. Thank you. How are we doing on time? We have 3 more minutes maybe, but have any more questions?
Question, non-professional question.
Hi,
What do we know about how the glyphs assemble and to what extent they concatenate into phrases or larger orders of meaning? And is there an underlying grammar or syntax for that?
Very good question. We're tracking what we call reading order in part so that we can see how they are put together, like how often is it side to side or top to bottom or whatever. And then they also, I think in the sentence I showed you, there's a black line sometimes connecting glyphs to show you, but then it doesn't tell you what's the order. You kind of have to look at it and figure out what it's trying to say. And then you could start with the inauguration of the temple at Tenochtitlan. You could start with the date. In this date, this temple, they in honor of this temple, say they drilled fire, blah, blah, blah. But anyway, usually the order becomes clear, especially if you have some text that helps you know what you're seeing and what's the context. So, in fact, in the database we have the glyph, and we have a gloss, if there is one, the alphabetic writing that goes with it, and then a context image so that people can see the bigger context out of which it came. We also provide a link to that page in the database. But I'm probably not fully answering your question because we're still trying to figure all that out, how the compounds are put together. And eventually, I already have several people interested in creating a Unicode keyboard of glyphs so that kids could learn to create glyphs by typing on the keyboard. But in order to have them, sort of set them loose doing that, we want to have some guidelines, like to go downward or upward or left to right or what have you. We want to show that we'll have to teach them some of the patterns for putting them together first. But we're creating SVGs, which are scalable vector graphic images that you can blow up and shrink down and you don't lose quality. So those will be used for the Unicode keyboarding set, if you will. So thank you. Yeah. Is that it? One more? Okay.
Actually, I do have a question. You were mentioning someone archiving this resource, and the library does archive online resources. We have an extensive web archiving program as well as an extensive digital collecting program. I'm kind of curious about the back end of your database, and I don't know if I missed the first 5 minutes, so okay. Apologies. Yeah. Are the image files linked to the text files by naming, or how are some of those linkages made? Because current web archive technology doesn't allow you to reconstruct searching, so it would crawl pages as long as you can tell it which page to go to, but you wouldn't be able to search in it like you would in a live version. And so I think the web archiving team is working on figuring out how to do that. But we've acquired databases with visual images by getting an export of the text and then an export of the images and getting repeated ones over time so that it tracks the growth of the database. So I was just curious about how that worked.
Interesting. Well, we use an open source program called Drupal. And Drupal lets you create like a page with an image being the focus. Everything is attached to that image. You know, you give it a title, you give it a description, you have a field that's for analysis, et cetera, et cetera. What color is it, what shape, et cetera. And all of that is kept, as far as I know, linked, you know, in each given record. It's called a record, which I would, like if it were a book, it would be a page, and it would all be on the same page. But yeah, and if you had someone who was interested in my collections, I'd be delighted to talk with them and work with them to see. I mean, we can do data dumps of, you know, all the images and the text associated with that image, and, you know, keep it in a folder, say, and then go to the next one. But there'll be thousands. But yeah, that's not digitally. We're not talking about a lot of material. I mean, so thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie, and please, everyone, join me in thanking her.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.